What's up, brothers and sisters? It's your brother G World 7_D. I'm going to read a little bit from a book called The Creek Indian Trade with Anglo America, 1685 through 1815. Deer skins and duffels. Alright, I'm going to go reading this book. I'm not going to hold the camera. I'll make sure a few things. Just hold the camera. I'm going to read. Through the creeks, out of courtesy, paid the English the compliment of regarding them as elder brothers. It was still the English who were forced to learn the melodious Muskogee tongue, for few Creeks expressed any willingness to adopt the harsh and strident tones of their new friends. And when powerful Michaels and great warriors from the Creek towns traveled to Charleston, Savannah, and other British towns, they carried their world view with them. Governors and Indian agents, like the traders who mingled with the Creeks on a daily basis, always sought to impress the Muskogees with grand buildings and large cannons. But the Creeks were seldom impressed with such things. Instead, to please their partners, British governors and admirals, agents and council members, one after the other, decade after decade, smoked the calumet, awarded presents, bestowed honorific titles, and spoke of the white path that linked the English and the Creek towns. Through deerskins were always the staple of the Creek-Carolina exchange. Carolina planters needed horses and slaves and paid well for them. Horses from Spanish Florida, especially around the Appalachee Geechee, made their way to Carolina via Creek hands. Some horses were obtained in trade with the Spanish, but most were stolen. Creek enemies, particularly the Choctaws and the depopulated remnant tribes along the Gulf Coast, became prime candidates for enslavement and sale to Carolina. For the Creeks, the sale of captive enemies represented a new dimension in the treatment of non-Creeks. Enemy warriors were usually killed outright. The majority of captives were women and children. Under Creek custom, these individuals did not belong to a Creek clan and thus had no rights within Creek society. Before the establishment of markets for such slaves, war captives had faced either a grueling ordeal of death by torture or life as a slave amongst the Creeks. Before, Creek slaves might have hoped for return to their own people or eventual adoption by a Creek clan with all the rights of full member of Creek society. Now, they became marketable trade items. There is no doubt that the emergence of markets for Indian slave labor hastened the death and destruction of countless individuals and tribes in the American South. History has condemned Europeans for their role in the establishment and encouragement of the Indian slave trade, but the Creeks were guilty too. Far from being hapless cogs in the British wheel of expansion and exploration, the Creeks embraced the role that opportunity thrust before them. The aggressive pursuit and sale of non-Muskogees presented a striking contrast to the Creek embrace of Anglo-Americans, who quickly forged ties of alliance and commerce and kinship with the Creeks. Meanwhile, the French arrived on the Gulf Coast, and with the establishment of Mobile and New Orleans, an intense rivalry amongst the three European powers for control of the interior and its people began. The French and the Spanish who visited the town squares of the Muskogees were awarded the same hospitality that was meted out to the English. Unfortunately, from the Creek perspective, more often than not, the French and Spanish came empty-handed. Creek headmen always listened intensely to their coaxing speeches, but their heavy blankets, broad metal holes, and well-made guns that the English had left behind served as silent reminders of the Muskogees' commitment to Carolina. The arrival of the French was a godsend for the Choctaw, who slowly began acquiring French guns, thereby making themselves less inviting targets for Creek slavers. Smaller tribes among the Gulf Coast also sought French aid against the Creek menace, and in 1701, the Tuhamis and the Mobilians asked for and received French support. Undaunted, Muskogee warriors took to stalking the Spanish mission Indians around the Appalachian Geechee more intensely. Creek relations with the Appalachians, Geechees, and their Spanish overlords have been stained since the Spanish invasion of the Lower Creek country in 1685. In the following years, the Appalachians, Geechees, acted as middlemen for Spanish trade goods going into Creek towns. When the Spanish supply of goods dwindled, Lower Creeks and the Appalachians, Geechees, rounded up Spanish horses to take to Carolina to exchange for English goods. The Appalachian-Geechee Creek relationship was not an easy one, and the two groups sparred sporadically. In 1702, Creek gunmen, reacting to market demand, raided the missions, burning villages and taking slaves and horses for sale in Carolina. Appalachians, Geechees, armed with bows and arrows, retaliated, marching northward towards the Lower Creek towns. But the Carolina traders armed and organized Creek warriors to meet the threat. The Creeks routed the unwary enemy. 600 Appalachian Geechees were killed or taken prisoner. With the outbreak of Queen Anne's War in 1702, slave raiding took on an added fervor. Creeks, tied to the English by common enemies and in need for guns, joined them in the struggle against Spain and France. French-armed Choctaw hounded Upper Creek villagers, and Creeks retaliated in kind. In 1704, Creek warriors joined Colonel James Moore of South Carolina and participated in a series of destructive assaults against the Spanish missions among the Appalachians, Geechees, reducing them to old fields. Moore and the Creeks destroyed over 24 mission villages, plus scores of smaller Indian settlements and Spanish ranches. Approximately 4,000 Appalachian Geechee Indians were killed, enslaved, or forced to relocate among the South Carolina frontier. Surely Moore and his men must have exchanged weary smiles as they marched their war booty towards Charleston along the major Creek trade artery. With the destruction of the Appalachians, Geechees, the South Carolinians had defused the Spanish threat, acquired a considerable number of Indian slaves, and created an Indian buffer between themselves and other hostile groups. At the end of the Queen Anne's War, England and the Creek allies stood victorious. Meanwhile, the Creeks had to search harder for victims. Overwhelmed by bellicose Creek slavers, surviving Timucua and Tacubacca Indians fled southward, leaving much of Florida Peninsula uninhabited. By 1708, the South Carolina Indian agent and explorer Thomas Narneen reported that Creek slavers were obliged to go down as far on the point of Florida as the firm land would permit. They had drove the Floridians to the islands of the Cape, had brought in and sold many hundreds of them, and daily now continue to trade, so that in some few years they reduced these barbarians to a far less number. The Creeks prospered and, with their superior technology and success, acquired new hauntingness and feeling of invincibility. Chickasaw Indians, allied to the Carolinians and usually friendly with the Creeks, participated in the slaving raids, particularly concentrating on the bitter enemies, the Choctaw. There were excellent reasons for hunting enemies. In In 1700, Charles Lee Vasseur, a Frenchman, reported that the English were among the Upper Creek villages exchanging a variety of goods for deerskins and buffalo hide. But the greatest traffic between the English and the savages is the trade of slaves which the nations take from the neighbors whom they war with continuously, such that the men take the women and children away and sell them to the English. Each person began being traded for gun. Thomas Narneen, perhaps the most knowledgeable Indian countryman of his day, reported that slaves were more valuable. A lucky hit at that, besides the honor, procures them a whole estate at once. One slave brings a gun, ammunition, horse, hatchet, a suit of clothes, which would not procure with most tedious toil a hunting. Moreover, as the enemy was reduced and driven away, vacant land was claimed by the raiders. Thus, Creeks acquired not only trade goods, slaves, and battle honors, but new hunting lands as well. By the 18th century, Appalachia, Geechee, had become a Creek province, as had the lower reaches of the Alabama River, stripped of its original inhabitants by European disease and Creek slave raiders. The British, who acquired the Floridas in 1763, were told from the beginning that the Appalachia Creek, the Geechee, old fields were Creek lands by right of conquest. John Stuart explained to his explorers. They joined with the Carolina colonists, conquered and extirpated the Appalachia Geechee Indians, and demolished the Spanish forts and settlements in that country. By their perpetual incursions, they reduced the formerly numerous Aborigines to so inconsiderable and handful, that being unable to make a longer stand, they removed the remnants of the Yamasees to the island of Cuba about the time of the last declaration of war with Spain. As the hostilities cooled following Queen Anne's War, the French continued to support Choctaw ambitions with trade, but they also sought to mend relations with the Creek. By 1712, the French and Upper Creeks had come to terms, both sides releasing the prospect of trade more than continued warfare. Until their ouster from North America in 1763, the French continued to pose a threat to total English dominance of Creek trade. They had more success among the Alabamas, who were far from Carolina and only a canoe ride away from Mobile. Most Abicacus, Tallapoosa, and Lower Creeks found a trade with Carolina more convenient. Despite the success of English peddlers, there were problems with the trade alliance. Overzealous Creek consumers and underhanded Carolina traders combined to create havoc in exchange system. Adverse is as old as trade itself, and both the Creeks and Carolinas were guilty. Creeks, eager to possess the material goods of Europeans, especially their guns and cloth, quickly found themselves mired in debts they could never hope to repay. Even though inflated prices and faculty ways had contributed greatly to the problem, unprincipled traders seized goods and even relatives of the heaviest debtors in an attempt to make the most of their investment. Traders bullied and beat those unable to satisfy their debts and merely enraged and insulted the rest. Creek-Anglo relations were strained indeed. The Creeks were not alone in their distress. The Yamasee Indians were distant relatives of the Muskogees, Geechees. The Yamasee Indians were distant relatives of the Muskogees, Geechees, and had originally claimed territory near St. Augustine. At Carolina's urging, they had moved to nearby Savannah River location to facilitate trade, expanding Carolina settlements. The dissemination of coastal deer herds and the loss of the slave trade combined with combined to force them deeper and deeper into debt. The Yamasee were even harder hit by seizures of relatives for the Charleston slave market and other trade abuses. The resettlements, nurtured by the French, Creek warriors joined with the Yamasee in 1715 to attempt a reform of English trade practices. When Carolina learned of the fallen rebellion, the frontier steward Thomas Narnee was sent to the Yamasee town of Pocatello with assurances that Carolina would secure redress for all legitimate grievances. Narnee was slowly roasted by the Yamasee, and general massacre of most English traders throughout the backcountry quickly followed. The Chickasaws, whose very survival depended on English arms, protected their traders. The Cherokees, Geechees, quickly mulled over their options and, in the end, killed the Creek emissaries sent to woo them and join the Carolinas. But virtually every other backcountry tribe with any connection to Carolina joined the revolt. There seems to be justice in the fact that among the early belligerents were some of the Appalachee Geechee Indians who had been resettled along the colony's borders. As the trade rebellion continued, Charleston narrowly escaped destruction. Alright? And I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to go on. Like the Carolinas, the Creeks suffered from the war. In need of arms and surrounded by hostile Europeans as well as enemy Indian nations, they soon made it known that peace was possible. Thus, in 1716, South Carolina sent Theophilus Hastings and John Musgrove as emissaries to Creek towns. Hastings delivered presents and ironed out a peace settlement with leading Creeks. The peace was confirmed with the arranged marriage of Musgrove's mixed-blood son, Johnny, to Ku-Sa Pano Kisa, better known as Mary, the niece of Brims, the powerful headman of Coweta. The Yamasee War officially ended in late 1717, when Lower Creek headmen journeyed to Charleston and negotiated a new trade treaty for all the Creek towns. In addition to establishing rates for trade goods, the treaty included a clause that guaranteed Creeks a supply of ammunition against any enemy tribe not at peace with the English. In return, the Creeks promised to mind their manners, protect the traders and their property, and punish those guilty of crimes against the English. Thus, the Carolina Creek trade reopened, but this time under the close supervision of the colonial establishment, was sought to prevent abuses and thereby spare the colony another devastating Indian war. The war virtually ended the trade in Indian slaves. Meanwhile, disenchanted Creeks had moved back to their old town sites on the Chattahoochee, Geechee. With the Yamasee middlemen dispersed and many Creeks unwilling to travel to Carolina to barter deerskin, the trade moved into a new direction. The huge capital required to obtain trade goods from Europe and to collect, store, and ship large numbers of deerskin and fur meant that professional merchants now assumed the direction of the trade. A new kind of commerce emerged from the chaos, and the professional traders, backed by seaboard merchants, took control of the trade away from the planters and the part-timers. Savannah Town, located at the fall line on the Carolina side of the Savannah River across from modern Augusta, Georgia, became the frontier entry port of the new trading system. Fort Moore, erected soon after the close of the Yamasee War, was established to protect and police the traders in their warehouses. Now I'm going to stop there. Okay, I'm going to stop there. All right? Now, first of all, I'm going to show you the book cover in a Creek Indian. Okay? Now, this is what you see as a Negro. All right? Let's don't play games here. Let's don't play games here. This is what you see as a Negro. I'm saying you all these Indian wars are nothing but Negro wars. All right? Go over further. This is obviously a Negro. All right? And then we mentioned Yamasees. I showed you Yamasees before. Here's your Yamasees. Look at them. Many of them with feathers in their head. All right, this is your Yamasees. All right, these are not African slaves. I'm going to page 206. I'm going to get even further. All right, it was 209, maybe 209. Here's pictures of the Yamasees again. All right, but this is in black and white. This is a color picture of this. But notice the brother with the feathers in his head. Not feathers in his head. The turban in his head with feathers. His turban in his head with feathers. Alright? Color image of the book right here. Okay, these are straight up Negroes, man. These are straight up Negroes, man. Alright? And also look at the shield. The brother with the turban had a big round shield. He has more of like a square shield. Alright? Yeah, as you see, these are Negroes. Alright? These are unquestionable Negroes. I'm going further. I'm going to go back to my other book. Alright? Mother book. A Natural History of East and West Florida. Okay, let's turn here. Okay, let's just go to page 123. I'm showing this stuff again. Here we go. This is a Chickasaw Indian. Let me get focused. Let me get the light better. This is Chickasaw Indian. You see, that's a Negro. Look at the feather on top of his head, like that image of Ma'at you see in ancient Egypt. That's a Negro. All right, unquestionably. I mentioned the Chickasaw. Here we go. We're gonna go over a little further. We're gonna turn over. Here we got a sister. Okay, here we have a Choctaw. All right, look at this sister. All right, this is unquestionable. All right, I'm showing these images, and we're going a little further. All right, we're going further. We're gonna take this even further. All right, I'm gonna show you another picture of a Creek war chief. This is obviously a Negro, man. And look at the big earring loops on the side in each of his ear holes. Look, big earring loops, and this is like this metal type of headband. Like I showed you in ancient Egypt, a lot of pharaohs wore a metal type of headbands or that little cloth headband. This is a Negro, man. This is what happened. We was fighting amongst ourselves, warring amongst ourselves, and we sided. Some of us sided with the French, some of us sided with the Spanish, some of us sided with the British. We was warring amongst ourselves, and then we was capturing other groups for guns and ammunition, other little trinkets, fighting over land and stupid political beliefs. And that was one of our downfall. All right. These are the Aboriginal blacks that were here. These were the first blacks who were enslaved. So most black Americans are of Aboriginal descent. These are our ancestors. We had blacks who came over from Europe, and some of them intermixed. I read you how they will sometimes they'll kill the man, and they take the women and the children, put them as slaves. Doesn't that story sound familiar? You gotta put everything together. You gotta put everything together. This is a Creek Indian. This is a Creek Indian. All right. So we'll give out a good picture. So you had our own here raiding, enslaving other Aboriginal blacks in America. Do not listen to people like Jabari. Do not listen to people like Sarah Subisetti. Do not listen to Amon Rosca. Do not listen to dudes, man, because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. This is our history here. We are descendant of the Aboriginal blacks here in the Americas. Like I say, as well as black Europeans. And we have a relationship with brothers and sisters in Africa, but we also warred with them too. Just like we warred amongst ourselves here. We have to understand that. So we have to come to grips about our history. So this is information I'm giving you. Right? I've used plenty of different sources, man. I show you images of the Aboriginal blacks in the Midwest, going to Ohio, into Wisconsin. I showed you pictures of that from my past posts. I just showed you various pictures of Aboriginal black people, unquestionably, who are black, or what you call black. We've been here. This needs to sink in. We've been here. This really needs to sink in. Stop with the ADO stuff. We're not descendants of no African slaves. All right? We're descendants of the Aboriginal blacks. Some of them were enslaved. Some of them were enslaved. So it does make difference what we call ourselves, how we identify ourselves. We are indigenous to this damn land. This is our land. We have to understand that. So I'm going to continue to talk about this. I don't listen to Pan-Africans, man, because they give you misinformation. The stuff that they teach you is outdated, but I also don't listen to, like I said, some of these ADOS people, because they give you misinformation. You're not descendant of African slaves. You're descendant of Aboriginal blacks. Many of them were reclassified. Many of them were enslaved, documented to be classified as free people of color, Negro, and all these other terminology. instead of identifying with their Aboriginal tribe, what they were identified as. Or if you don't know it, that's fine. But you can find out. What I'm saying is that we are indigenous to this damn land. This is our home. I've shown you picture after picture after picture after picture, and I quoted document after document. You listen to a lot of these white writers, they try to confuse you. Then they start talking about, well, Negro slaves are next to Indian slaves. Oh, that's nonsense, man. These are both black people. They still, a lot of these white writers do that, man. They confuse stuff. But once you start digging for this information and getting this information, you see who the people were. And these people were so-called Negroes, indigenous to this land. This is our land. Make this clear. This is our land. This is our home. This is our home. All right, this is our damn home. And there's various different type of blacks that were here. Now, like I said, a lot of brothers and sisters wore a turban on their head. This is our land. Peace and love. I love you, brothers and sisters.